My name is Zachary Smith, and this is my presentation on the degradation of the public school system. The problem in the simplest sense. The situation. Test scores are on the decline, literacy rates are on the decline, school environments are finding it harder and harder to keep up with the needs of students, and technology is ever-changing and therefore helping students just as much as harming them. And this is also not to mention the fact that teachers are finding technology more and more difficult as well, but we'll get into that. And then homeschooling as well as unschooling are on the rise because of growing distrust in public education. This might not be an immediate cause of the issue, but it is certainly a symptom of it, I would argue. And regardless of this, I think it certainly feeds into the larger problem of, the whole situation. It's still an example of the disconnect that's happening. So how do we get to this situation? The answer is definitely not a straightforward one, though there is reason to believe that one of the biggest things that led to it is COVID-19. Of course, public schools have been on the trend towards this direction for a while. This didn't just happen, but I think COVID definitely put a really big damper on things. So yeah, the who of it all. So who is this affecting? Well, in the broadest sense, students both past and present. This means that a much broader sense that this is an issue that touches everyone at some point in their lives, both young and old. It'll take people who care about changing the fate of children everywhere. People like you, the ones watching this video. COVID-19 and declining literacy rates. The inevitable. A great deal can be said about the coronavirus pandemic. Here's some of the things that we do, in fact, know. In 2020, the world shut down due to COVID-19. Because of this, students were forced to finish their 2019-2020 school year online. This was difficult on students for a number of reasons, one of the largest being that many students had never experienced remote learning before. This issue was only further amplified by younger students who are really only able to experience learning in the classroom before now. So whether that be because the connection to the internet was limited, difficult home lives, or being unable to focus on school from inside their homes, only ever being able to learn from inside the classroom before made it just about impossible for them to learn outside of the classroom. And then a note before moving on to this next section here. I just wanted to note that this data was from a study conducted on European countries. But I think that, if anything, that just further illustrates the point that, public schools have been trending towards these things for a while. Okay, so the younger the student, the more COVID affected them. This is essentially because younger students have more to gain from being in school rather than an older student, which would mean, conversely, they have the most to lose when not attending that school as well. The easiest way to think about this is the fact that students' homes are not designed for school. Not only were younger students being thrust into an entirely new experience that was remote learning, but this shift was also happening while they were learning about incredibly foundational skills. Students need the face-to-face interaction that comes from the interaction they get with teachers. They also need access to on-hand teaching resources at all times. Again, this is not something that students are going to have access to in their own homes. Homes are probably not designed for school. Foreshadowing, hint, hint. If it was not evident already, these things led to a massive decrease in literacy. Again, this is something that was trending in that direction for a while, but COVID exacerbated these issues. The more restrictions that were placed on schools, the more the students suffered. This basically means that for students who had access at home, had access to some face-to-face to schooling, showed less losses in literacy than students who had to learn things remotely. So I just way butchered that, but basically what I was trying to say is that students who learned face-to-face during the pandemic showed less loss of knowledge than students who were learning remotely. Okay, everything else is on the decline too. As we've just discussed, COVID left an incredible impact on public schools. But as I've stressed a few times now, COVID is not the sole reason for these declines. Testing scores have been on the decline for a while, and we'll see that when looking at these here. This specifically is from the American Enterprise Institute, and it's about American 8th graders. I think it was the year 2023, or 2022, or up until 2022, I guess I should say. So for these math and civics tests, you can see that the scores in these two both peaked in 2014, at least for all percentiles they did. Another commonality on these two charts, at least, it's not the case for the other two, but for just these two, the 90th percentile and 75th percentile still increased somewhat after 2014 before dropping off the side of a cliff like the rest of the percentiles. These ones, they all peaked. I guess the reading one kind of did the same thing as well too, but the history one peaked in 2014 and then they all started to drop right after that. But let's go back to these for a second. Though I didn't get as much time to go over politics in this presentation as I would have liked to, and maybe it's better that I didn't because that's just a whole other thing. It was interesting to me that these scores peaked under the Obama administration, an administration that put a great amount of emphasis on students of all backgrounds, but especially those who had a harder time in school. So it would probably not be any coincidence that a lot of these things started to dip when Trump first got into office. They did recover a bit in 2018, but then they dipped again. I don't quite recall the extent to what Trump talked about public schools in his first presidency. Obviously, he's talking about it a lot right now, but I wonder if that had an effect on things. Regardless, when taking all students into account, not simply just the 90th percentile, so like the highest up students, on average, all students peaked in 2014, roughly before dropping off. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that another factor that likely influenced the will of the public schools was politics. They have unfortunately probably permeated the landscape of public schools a lot longer than people probably realize. Again, I didn't really get the chance to dive into that quite as much. That's kind of more just an extrapolation that I've come across myself from analyzing trends and things and like seeing where we are in the world right now. But yeah. And then this is, of course, all very timely because, yeah, like I said, Trump's been talking about it right now. If politics did play a big part in these test scores, which I think there's reason to believe they will, then they will likely continue to drop. So then, obviously, as these two charts just illustrated, students are far worse off than they were just 20 years ago. I mean, you can see, even just from a couple years ago, like I said, on a lot of them, 2014, but I mean, yeah, I'm trying to find a good example here, but like 2010 for the civics test was a good year, and I mean, that wasn't even that long ago, so it's just kind of crazy. The increasing needs of students or how technology is ruining everything. Students are becoming increasingly unhappy in schools. One possible reason for this is the internet. Some studies have found that the more detached children are from the internet, the more anxious they get. But then conversely, the more they're on the internet, the more they're distracted. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. But then we also have bullying that is popping up in public schools more, and students are also becoming generally just unhappy in schools. So then how are teachers reacting to some of these things? Teachers are doing a lot of things to try and de-emphasize technology. I know I was reading that some teachers are trying to instill like a 15-minute like focus break where like students aren't using any technology and they just kind of have to like focus for 15 minutes just on like something like, I think it said like logic, puzzle, like, I don't know, just normal stuff that doesn't involve a computer. Teachers are having a harder time acquainting the quote-unquote difficult children in their classrooms. I put quote-unquote just because, that's a very subjective thing. But just with everything that's happening at once, everything's kind of changing at once. So it's like teachers are having to deal with all these changes at once, but then they're also having to deal with like children changing, and it's just a lot. So teachers are being encouraged to communicate with each other more and more as like a hope of finding more effective means amongst each other for how they might find an effective path forward for how they can get past some of these things. So this slide was more focused on just general changes in public schools. This one here is more pointed towards technology. As I previously mentioned, students are not responding well to technology. And yes, technology is very helpful in addressing gaps in learning, but there's a lot of evidence that suggests that using these new sources of education could actually be overwhelming students. And if they're overwhelming students, then they are also overwhelming the teachers, not only because the students themselves are overwhelming the teachers, but as we'll see over here, teachers are being overwhelmed by the technology too. A lot of teachers are reporting wanting less technology resources in their classroom and just kind of less resources in general. It seems like that's kind of a common theme, is some classes are kind of getting bogged down by a lot of different things. And so they were saying that they wanted a couple more precise resources as opposed to a very wide range of very, kind of exhaustive resources. And then this was a crazy one that I came across, that a lot of teachers are reporting that they didn't feel like they were even properly prepared to use technology in their classroom, whether it's because they weren't taught about it beforehand, like, when they were going to school for becoming a teacher, or like, the school wasn't proper, like the school that they're teaching at wasn't properly acquainting them to the technology before it actually entered their classrooms. But just in general, teachers were not prepared to use them. So when you have this it's like the perfect storm of it's overwhelming the students. The teachers are already overwhelmed at a baseline, as we went over here, but then they also are being overwhelmed by the technology. So there's just a lot of overwhelming happening. So there's a lot of factors there that are affecting teachers' ability to really kind of teach effectively. Although it'd be hard to say that technology is unequivocally having a negative impact on schools, it does make you wonder if there was a type of schooling that was less emphasized on technology, if that would perhaps actually have a more positive effect on children. Foreshadowing again. So let's move on here. In the wake of the decline, where does the new solution lie? So this is kind of talking about some alternate forms of schooling that have cropped up more and more since COVID. They've obviously always been a thing, but I thought it felt good to touch on them, especially unschooling, which I'd never heard of before going over this. So homeschooling is a form of schooling that takes place entirely at home, obviously, duh. It's a curriculum that is created more by the parents and is meant to emphasize tailored learning experiences for students. Obviously, again, homeschooling has always been a thing, but as we'll see over here on the right side, it is almost doubled the amount of people who are being homeschooled. The number is almost doubled since COVID, which is kind of crazy. Went from 2.5 million prior to COVID to an estimate of 4 million. So it could be, give or take more or less, but the estimates are believed to be around those numbers. And then, though hard numbers are hard to nail down for the specific benefits for things, because as far as I could tell, I didn't get a chance to look into it super deeply, but as far as I could tell, there hasn't been a lot of looking into it, especially since COVID, of hard data of how much it's really helping students, but a lot of parents and commentators on the situation are like swearing by it. So I don't know, that means something, I guess. So my opinion on homeschooling, I don't think it's the best idea. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I don't think that it's the best idea in the world to have a form of schooling that is entirely isolated from other students. I myself was not the biggest talker when I was younger, and I'm still really not right now. And that was while I was in school. So I can just only imagine of how much it's really helping students, but a lot of parents and commentators on the situation are like swearing by it. So I don't know, that means something, I guess. So my opinion on homeschooling, I don't think it's the best idea. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I don't think that it's the best idea in the world to have a form of schooling that is entirely isolated from other students. I myself was not the biggest talker when I was younger, and I'm still really not right now. And that was while I was in school. So I can just only imagine like how students would react in social situations who are homeschooled. Like, they get homeschooled their whole life, and then, they're adults in the adult world, and like obviously that's a very big blanket statement. Not necessarily all of them are going to struggle, but like I don't know, I feel like a lot of them probably would. I also think it's just generally weird to not have kind of a standardized curriculum. I think having a curriculum that's focused more on tailored learning experiences for students are good, and we'll kind of talk about that more later. But I think that not having any sort of standardized curriculum, and I think there was, but it said that it was largely decided by the people who do it and like the parents who do it and whatnot. So there's probably some standardization, but like, who's gonna like check on them? Like that's the whole point, is it's happening at your home. So I don't know. Unschooling is a variant of homeschooling that takes place at home or potentially other important places of study. Where it differs most from homeschooling is its dedication to hands-on teaching and a curriculum that is largely dedicated by the students themselves. So unschooling is ruled much more by curiosity, as opposed to a curriculum that is decided on by parents and things. Does it work? There's estimated roughly 2.5 million unschooled students in the U.S., and that's unschooled as in like unschooling, not students who aren't going to school. Studies show that unschooling helps build better bonds with families, helps students with special needs learn better, and as well as fostering a more curious mindset within students. As an outsider, I don't think it's hard to see like how like that makes sense, that tracks. Like I feel like unschooling is definitely in a more positive spot than homeschooling generally, but I still personally don't know if it's the best path forward. Although I do still like it personally a bit more than homeschooling. I think that having a curriculum that is largely curated and dictated by the curiosity of the child or the student, I think is a very cool thing, and I think should be emphasized in schools a lot more. But again, I still feel like this kind of runs into the same similar problems of like, how much is it being regulated and, things like that. Like it's still only ever happening entirely at home. So, I mean, the day-to-day, it could just kind of go anywhere. And that does have some positive, effects, but it could also have some negative effects too. So who knows? I do really think it's really cool, kind of like these positive psychological effects it's having on students of building better bonds with parents, fostering a more curious mindset within students, and then helping students with special needs learn better is huge. That's very cool. So if that is a positive effect of unschooling, then, that's definitely a point in its favor. So here we have charter schools versus private schools. Obviously, again, all of these things existed before COVID, but I was covering the other two, so I thought it'd be important to cover these ones. I was originally only going to cover charter schools, but I thought I might as well cover private schools too, because they're kind of similar. But charter schools are public schools that don't require students to pay tuition. They're still governmentally funded and open to all students within a certain jurisdiction. Whereas private schools are like the exact opposite of that. They're not funded by the government. They do require students to pay tuition. And they do have an admission process for who they let in. That is a very large difference between charter schools and private schools. Charter schools specifically do not have an admission process, at least not in the same way that private schools do. I forget the exact wording that they use, but it's not, you don't like interview in the same way, quote unquote, that you do for private school. And then private schools are also generally, a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, they're tied to a specific political ideal or religious ideology, or things like that, where a lot of their learning in school is kind of tailored towards those kinds of things. Charter schools seem to have good track records with students with special needs and generally put a larger emphasis on post-high school life, which I think is awesome. Something that I didn't get a chance to talk about quite as much in this presentation was just how much students were struggling in post-high school life. It's rough. I mean, obviously just anecdotally, myself, but I know plenty of other people who just didn't feel prepared for life. And that was not just an anecdotal thing. It's a phenomenon that is occurring more and more. So having charter schools focusing on post-high school life, I think is a very good thing. One of the easiest, or I don't know, kind of quickest positives I kind of came across for private schools was just the fact that they oftentimes outperform public schools in state testing. But I mean, state testing only dictates so much, which we'll kind of talk about in a second here. But so that was the solution. How might we move on from here? What are some possible conclusions that we can come to, and what might I propose in light of them? Are any of these forms of schooling the future? Spoiler alert, I don't think any one of them wholly is good, but I think a lot of them do have positive aspects about them, except for private schools. I didn't really touch on that back here. I don't know, at least from personal experience, and maybe this is a generalization, but I feel like private schools I know people who have gone to private schools, and I just feel like I don't know, I don't want to, generalize, but I just feel like private schools ain't it. So here's what I might propose. As I've hinted at throughout this presentation, I think there are a lot of elements of the public school system that aren't working. Schools need to be free of political and religious agendas, like I've kind of mentioned previously, especially like with private schools as an example, or kind of what we were talking about earlier with the possible influence on the Trump administration that might be having on public schools and whatnot. They probably need to have less emphasis on technology. I don't think having no technology is necessarily necessary, but I think having a less emphasis on it is a good thing. And they need to allow students to learn about the things they want to learn about, and have it be led by curiosity. And most importantly, they need to allow children to be children. So often in public schools, and it is one of the biggest things in my eyes that makes homeschooling and unschooling so appealing, it's just the de-emphasis, you know what I'm trying to say, the unemphasis of testing, I think is huge. I I think that public schools put entirely too much focus on testing, and I think it's one of the biggest factors that leads to students not feeling prepared for post-high school life. Again, I didn't get a chance to look into that quite as much as I would have liked to. I'm kind of speaking more anecdotally here once again, but at least I know me personally, I struggled with a lot of things in high school and even after high school for the longest time because of testing, and I don't think that they are good, largely. So these are kind of some simple charts that I drew up here. These obviously aren't like a be-all, end-all kind of a thing, and even I would probably make adjustments on them, even now as I've kind of, went this project a bit more, but I do think a lot of the hallmarks of these I think are good. So Monday would kind of, the first day of the week would kind of start out with students learning a new topic. And obviously, at least for this structure specifically, I was thinking of very young students. And also, I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's kind of what this whole presentation specifically I had in mind was for younger students. Obviously, all these things apply to any student of any age. But specifically, like for the COVID, the effects of COVID and the effects of technology and like this that I'm going over right now, focus very largely on younger children, although maybe the structure would work for older children too. I don't know. But Monday you would learn about a new topic, and that could be, I don't know, let's just say money, for example. You learn about money, how to, count money, what it is, maybe like brief history on it, yada, yada. So then Tuesday, you would go deeper into that topic, and specifically you would push for a larger emphasis on the real world application of that thing. So like if the topic was money, for example, you could talk about what it's used for, where it came from, the history of it. Obviously you probably couldn't go fully into like the economy with young students, but I mean, you could probably at least talk about pretty basic principles like, supply and demand and, things like that. But the main emphasis would definitely be more on real world application. That is a must in my eyes. On Wednesday, the biggest event of Wednesday would be that they would kind of learn, they would kind of decide if they like the topic, and obviously either, yes or no. The thing that I like about this part of the week is it allows students to see that they have agency in their own lives. So it's instilling good values in them, but it's also allowing them to decide what they want to learn about. So it is still kind of based in that curiosity and that agency, which I think is a must. So then on Thursday, it could be that, on Wednesday, if you said you did like the topic, on Thursday, you could learn about possible careers that related to money. And then if you didn't like the topic, on Thursday, you will learn about a secondary topic. I didn't think specifically about what secondary topics might be. Maybe it could be that you would learn about the topic, about next week's topic early, or maybe like, depending on the topic that you're talking about that week, maybe you could kind of talk about a secondary topic that kind of still related to money. Like, I don't know, maybe you could talk about, trade or, something like that. Maybe it could be a more geographical based, kind of like how money can skew towards that, and so it would be kind of like a completely different part of the brain. If you said no, the students could learn about something entirely new that was still, you still kind of see the threads between the two, but it was about something entirely different. And then Friday would be a free day led by curiosity. I think that this is a really cool idea, me personally. Although I can see why things like recess, are kind of phased out as students get older. And I get that to a certain extent, but I feel like at the very least, if you did kind of follow this kind of structure on Fridays, you could have those free days where they were led by curiosity, and maybe they could even encourage students to, kind of go, not literally anywhere in the building, but maybe it could be like, and if they were a third grader, it could be like, you could go anywhere in the third grade hallway and you could talk to other teachers and see what they're teaching about. Or, you could, there could be a teacher that, was on the playground that day. And so they could kind of get like, they could just play on the playground if they wanted to. Or, they could be like, oh, I want to dig in the grass so I can, get my hands dirty, like that kind of thing. Like it would be further emphasizing that, that curiosity aspect that I think is very important. And then, the following Monday, that cycle would just kind of repeat. So, yeah, that is pretty much it here. These last 3 slides are just my works cited pages. So I think that should be it. Thank you for listening.